Today, we're diving into one of the most shocking and tense developments in Europe. Denmark has just cut off Russia's Baltic Sea route, and reports are suggesting that Putin is in complete panic mode. The situation in the Baltic Sea is heating up faster than anyone expected, and what's unfolding now could change the balance of power in Northern Europe forever. For years, Russia relied heavily on the Baltic Sea as a vital trade and military corridor. It connects Russia to Europe through key ports like Kaliningrad, which is not just a military outpost, but a critical strategic hub for Moscow's influence in the region. The Baltic Sea has been Russia's lifeline for transporting oil, gas, and essential goods. But now, with Denmark's latest move, that lifeline may be slipping away and the consequences could be massive. So, what exactly did Denmark do? According to multiple reports, Denmark has effectively blocked or restricted Russian access through key maritime routes connecting the Baltic Sea to the North Sea. Specifically through the Danish straits, the narrow waterways that serve as the only passage between the Baltic and the open ocean. These straits, including the Øresund, the Great Belt, and the Little Belt, are under Denmark's control. By leveraging its geographic position, Denmark has the power to control what goes in and out of the Baltic. And now it appears that Copenhagen has decided to use that power against Moscow. The move comes after months of rising tension between NATO countries and Russia. Ever since the Ukraine conflict escalated, the Baltic region has become a flashpoint for military exercises, surveillance, and territorial disputes. Denmark, a NATO member, has been working closely with its allies to monitor Russian naval activity. Now, it seems Denmark has taken a decisive step to limit Russia's strategic mobility in the region, and the Kremlin is furious. Putin's government sees this as a direct provocation and a deliberate attempt to choke Russia's military and trade access. For Moscow, being cut off from the Baltic is more than just an economic issue, it's a symbolic blow. The Baltic Sea has long represented Russia's connection to Western Europe, and losing control or access to it signals geopolitical isolation. The panic in the Kremlin isn't just about ships, it's about influence, pride, and power. This situation also raises serious questions about how far Denmark is willing to go. Officially, Denmark claims the move is part of enhanced security measures in response to unidentified maritime threats and strategic instability in the region. But behind the scenes, many analysts believe this is Denmark's way of sending a clear message to Russia. Any aggression in the Baltic or against NATO allies will come with severe consequences. Russia's response has been swift and aggressive. Moscow's defense ministry reportedly placed its Baltic fleet on high alert. Russian naval vessels have been spotted increasing patrols near Kaliningrad, while Russian aircraft have made several close passes near Danish airspace, a dangerous escalation that has NATO watching closely. There are also reports that Russia is preparing to move additional forces into the region as a show of strength. But what's interesting is that Denmark is not acting alone. This decision appears to be coordinated with several NATO allies, especially Sweden, Finland, and Poland, all countries that share borders or interests in the Baltic region. Since Finland joined NATO, the alliance's presence in the Baltic Sea has dramatically increased, surrounding Russia from multiple directions. Now, with Denmark's latest move, the Baltic could effectively become a NATO-controlled zone, cutting off one of Russia's last strategic waterways to Europe. This development also has massive implications for energy security. Russia has been using its Baltic ports to export oil and liquefied natural gas, bypassing sanctions and keeping revenue flowing into the Kremlin's war machine. If Denmark's blockade or restrictions tighten, it could cripple Russia's ability to move its energy products westward. European nations already trying to reduce dependence on Russian energy would see this as a huge strategic victory. However, for Russia, this could trigger a dangerous response. Some experts fear that Moscow might attempt to retaliate either economically or militarily. Blocking sea routes could be seen as an act of aggression, and Russia has a history of responding harshly to any perceived threats to its trade routes. There's growing concern that this could spiral into a new confrontation in the Baltic one that could draw in NATO forces and escalate tensions to a whole new level. For years, the Baltic Sea has been a silent stage for geopolitical competition, with submarines, surveillance planes, and naval patrols constantly monitoring each other. But this latest move by Denmark changes the entire equation. It's no longer about quiet observation, it's now about strategic control. Denmark, a relatively small country compared to Russia, is now at the center of one of Europe's biggest standoffs. What makes this even more significant is Denmark's control over the Danish straits, one of the most important maritime choke points in the world. Every ship entering or leaving the Baltic Sea must pass through Danish waters. This gives Copenhagen enormous leverage, both legally and militarily. Under international law, Denmark must allow innocent passage, but it also has the right to restrict it for security reasons, and it appears Denmark is now exercising that right more aggressively than ever before. Putin, meanwhile, is facing growing internal pressure. The Russian public is increasingly frustrated with the country's isolation and the economic toll of ongoing sanctions. Losing free access to the Baltic only adds to that pressure. It makes Russia look weak and cornered, especially when NATO's influence keeps expanding. The fact that even small countries like Denmark can challenge Russia's movements on the seas is a humiliation that the Kremlin cannot easily ignore. Behind closed doors, Moscow is reportedly exploring alternative routes, such as expanding operations through the Arctic or rerouting exports through ports in the Black Sea. But these solutions are costly and logistically difficult. The Baltic Sea route was the most efficient and direct pathway for Russian trade with Europe. Losing it would not only slow down commerce, but also hurt Russia's credibility as a maritime power. Meanwhile, Denmark's decision has been widely praised by Western allies. In Brussels and Washington, officials view this as a bold and necessary step to ensure regional security. With Russia's increasing aggression in both the Baltic and the Arctic, NATO sees control of these waters as essential for deterrence. By standing firm, Denmark has shown that even smaller nations can play a major role in defending the alliance's interests. But the move also carries risks. If tensions escalate too far, Denmark could find itself on the front line of a potential confrontation. Russia has already accused Denmark of provoking conflict and warned of serious consequences. Some Russian media outlets are even suggesting that Moscow might retaliate by disrupting undersea cables or energy pipelines running through the Baltic, a threat that has already worried NATO planners since the Nord Stream pipeline explosions. The geopolitical chess game in the Baltic is reaching a critical point. On one side, you have a united NATO alliance tightening its control over the region. On the other, a frustrated Russia struggling to maintain access and relevance. Denmark's actions may have triggered a turning point that pushes Russia into a corner it cannot easily escape. For Putin, losing influence in the Baltic means losing one of his last levers of power in Europe. Kaliningrad, Russia's heavily militarized enclave, now faces increasing isolation. If supply routes are restricted, maintaining military operations there will become far more difficult. This could weaken Russia's deterrence capability in Northern Europe, something NATO has been strategically aiming for since the start of the Ukraine war. At the same time, this crisis is uniting the Nordic countries like never before. Sweden and Finland, once neutral, are now fully aligned with NATO, sharing intelligence, resources, and military infrastructure. Denmark's bold step could be seen as part of a broader Nordic defense strategy designed to contain Russia's maritime reach. It sends a clear message that the era of Russian dominance in the Baltic is over. As for Putin, his options are narrowing. He could attempt diplomatic pressure, economic retaliation, or military posturing, but each carries enormous risks. Any direct confrontation with NATO in the Baltic could spiral into a full-blown regional conflict, something Russia can ill afford right now. The Kremlin's fear isn't just about losing a sea route, it's about losing strategic influence in one of the most critical regions bordering Europe. Meanwhile, ordinary Russians are beginning to feel the effects of isolation. With trade routes shrinking and Europe closing its doors, Russia's economy is under increasing strain. The blockade or restriction in the Baltic adds another layer of difficulty, threatening jobs, exports, and access to critical imports. Inside Russia, voices of dissent are growing louder, questioning how long the country can sustain this geopolitical standoff. On the other hand, Denmark's decision has boosted its international profile. A nation often viewed as quiet and diplomatic is now being seen as a key player in European defense. This newfound assertiveness could inspire other small nations to take a firmer stand against authoritarian aggression. It also demonstrates that geography, when combined with political courage, can shift global power dynamics. As the standoff continues, the world is watching closely. The Baltic Sea, once seen as a calm and commercial zone, is now one of the most militarized and politically charged waters in the world. Every naval movement, every diplomatic statement, and every new sanction adds fuel to a growing confrontation that could redefine the future of European security. For now, Denmark holds the upper hand. By cutting off or restricting Russia's access, it has sent a powerful message that aggression has limits, and that even the smallest choke point can change the course of global politics. But the question remains, how will Russia respond? Will Putin escalate and risk another major conflict, or will he back down and look for alternative routes? Whatever happens next, one thing is certain: the Baltic Sea will never be the same again. This is more than a maritime dispute. It's a struggle for dominance, influence, and survival in the heart of Europe. Denmark's bold move has changed the game, and now the entire world is waiting to see how far this new confrontation will go. And as reports continue to come in, one thing is clear: the balance of power in Europe has shifted. Putin is panicking because for the first time in decades, Russia's access to the Baltic is no longer guaranteed. Denmark's action might just be the spark that defines the next chapter of this geopolitical drama, one where small nations rise to challenge great powers. And the map of Europe is redrawn not by war, but by courage.